The smoke was so thick I could taste metal on my tongue. That's what I remember most about that moment. Not the screaming, not the artillery fire that made the earth convulse beneath my boots, but that bitter copper taste that told me something had gone terribly wrong. Lieutenant Morrison was 3 steps ahead of me, his helmet reflecting the orange glow of burning tanks in the distance when I saw his body jerked forward. Not violently, almost gracefully, like a dancer missing a step. He crumpled into the mud, and suddenly 23 pairs of eyes were on me. I was 22 years old, a corporal. I'd been in France for 6 weeks, and now I was in command. The date was June 18th, 1944. 12 days after D, we were supposed to be pushing inland from Normandy, part of the massive Allied offensive that would, everyone said, win us the war, but nobody told us about the hedge. The Bocache, the French called them ancient walls of earth and vegetation that turned every field into a fortress, every lane into a kill zone. The Germans knew this terrain. They'd had 4 years to dig in, to plant mines, to sight their machine guns on every approach. We didn't know anything. Our company had started the morning with 140 men. By noon, we were down to 40. By the time Lieutenant Morrison fell, we were 24 soldiers huddled in a drainage ditch that smelled of death and summer grass, pinned down by a German MG-42 machine gun that fired so fast it sounded like fabric ripping. 1,200 rounds per minute, they told us in training. Hitler's Buzau, they called it. All I knew was that every time someone tried to move, the hedgerow above us exploded in a shower of leaves and dirt. Morrison wasn't moving. I could see his hand, palm up in the mud, fingers slightly curled. He'd been holding a map. It was gone now, somewhere in the churned earth. I pressed myself deeper into the ditch, feeling the cold water seep through my uniform, and tried to think. Tried to remember anything from training about what you do when your commanding officer dies and you're suddenly responsible for keeping 23 other men alive. Private Henderson was next to me, his face so pale it looked gray. He was 19, from Iowa. He'd showed me pictures of his girlfriend 3 days ago, told me they were getting married when he got home. Now he was staring at me, waiting for orders. They were all waiting. The machine gun fired again, a long burst that sent mud splashing into the ditch. Someone was crying. I couldn't tell who. The sound mixed with the distant thunder of artillery, the crack of rifle fire from somewhere to our left, the drone of aircraft overhead. The entire world was noise and violence, and in the middle of it, I had to make a decision. I thought about my father. He'd fought in the last war, in the trenches of the Somme. He never talked about it much, but once, after too much whiskey, he told me the only thing that mattered in combat was keeping your men alive. Not medals, not objectives, not even victory. Just getting your men home. But Morrison had orders. We were supposed to take the crossroads half a mile ahead, link up with Baker Company, secure the approach to St. Lay. Division was counting on us. The entire offensive depended on units like ours clearing these hedges, pushing the Germans back, making room for the armor to break through. How do you weigh that against 23 lives? I pulled out my canteen, took a drink. The water was warm and tasted like metal, like everything else. Henderson was still staring at me. So was Corporal Davies, a veteran who'd survived North Africa and Sicily. He was 31, which made him ancient by our standards. He'd been passed over for promotion twice. He should have been given the orders, not me. But he just watched me with those tired, bloodshot eyes, waiting to see what the kid would do. The machine gun had gone quiet. In the sudden stillness, I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. Could hear the wet, labored breathing of someone wounded further down the ditch. Could hear the distant sound of German voices calling to each other in that harsh, guttural language that had haunted my nightmares since Omaha Beach. They were repositioning. We had maybe 2 minutes before they opened up again. I looked at Morrison's hand one more time. Then I looked at Henderson's pale face, at Davies's exhausted eyes, Achi the 21 other men who were depending on me to make the right choice. The problem was, I had no idea what the right choice was. Everything I'd learned in training seemed useless now. They'd taught us tactics, formations, how to advance under fire. They hadn't taught us how to choose between duty and survival, between following orders from a dead officer and keeping living soldiers alive, between being a coward and being a killer. The hedgerow behind us was maybe 8 feet high, so thick with roots and vegetation that it had taken German pioneers with explosives to break through similar barriers. To our left, the field where Morrison had fallen. To our right, more hedgerows, more unknown dangers. Ahead, the crossroads we were supposed to take. Behind us, the beach we'd left 6 weeks ago, where so many had died that the water had turned red. There was no good option. There never is. In war, you just choose and live with it. If you survive long enough to live with anything. I raised my head slightly, trying to see over the edge of the ditch. Immediately, a single shot cracked out, and I felt the bullet pass close enough to hear it sizzle through the air. A sniper, of course. They always had snipers. Henderson grabbed my arm. "What do we do, Corporal?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, I heard a sound that changed everything. A deep, mechanical rumble, growing louder, coming from behind us. Tanks. But whose tanks? That question, more than anything else, crystallized my decision, because I realized in that moment that we weren't alone out here, that this wasn't just about 24 men in a ditch. We were part of something larger, something that had brought millions of men across an ocean to fight in fields they'd never heard of, for reasons that seemed clear back home but got muddy and confused when you were lying in the mud watching your lieutenant die. I thought about Morrison's last words. He'd been briefing us when the sniper fired, explaining how the crossroads ahead was crucial for the armor's advance. How, if we didn't take it, the tanks would be delayed, the offensive would stall, men would die because we failed to do our job. And I thought about Henderson's girlfriend back in Iowa, waiting for a letter, about Davies's 3 kids in Brooklyn, about the 21 other men whose names I'd barely learned, whose stories I didn't know, whose deaths would be my responsibility if I made the wrong choice. The tank sounds were getting closer. I had to decide now. "Davies," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Get on the radio. Find out whose armor is coming up behind us. Henderson, you and Martinez work your way left along this ditch. See if you can find where it connects to the main irrigation channel. Everyone else, stay down and stay quiet. When that machine gun opens up again, nobody moves. Nobody fires back. We're going to make them think they killed us all." Davies was already on the radio, speaking in urgent whispers. Henderson and Martinez started crawling through the mud, moving with the careful slowness of men who knew that speed kills in a place like this. The others watched me, some with hope in their eyes, some with fear, some with that blank, thousand-year stare that came from seeing too much death. I still wasn't sure if I was making the right decision. I wasn't sure there was a right decision, but I was making a decision, and somehow that felt like enough. The machine gun opened up again, raking the hedgerow above us with another long burst. This time, nobody flinched. We'd learned fast these past weeks. You learn fast or you die. I thought about my father again, about what he'd said about keeping your men alive. But I also thought about why we were here, why we'd crossed that terrible ocean and waded through those awful beaches. It wasn't just to survive, it was to win, to stop something that needed to be stopped, even if it cost us everything. Maybe there was a way to do both. Keep my men alive and complete the mission. Maybe Lieutenant Morrison's death didn't have to be meaningless. Maybe I could make a decision that honored both the duty we'd been given and the lives I was responsible for. Or maybe I was just a 22-year-old kid who didn't know anything, trying to convince himself that he had any control over what happened next. The tank sounds were very close now. Davies looked up from the radio, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. They were ours. Henderson came crawling back, covered in mud up to his shoulders. "The ditch connects about 50 yards that way," he whispered. "But there's a gap we'd have to cross, maybe 10 feet of open ground." I nodded, my mind racing. Pieces of a plan were coming together, fragile and uncertain, but better than just lying here waiting to die. I gathered the men close, keeping my voice low, and started explaining what we were going to do. As I spoke, I watched their faces change. The fear didn't go away. It never goes away, but something else appeared alongside it. Not quite hope, maybe just the absence of despair. The knowledge that someone had a plan, even if it was a bad one, even if it got some of them killed, because that's what leadership is in war. It's not about making the right decision. It's about making a decision and making it mean something. It's about looking at impossible choices and choosing anyway, knowing that men will die because of what you choose, but that more men might die if you choose nothing. I thought I understood that, lying in that ditch in Normandy with my dead lieutenant's blood mixing with the rainwater and mud. I thought I'd figured out what it meant to command, what it meant to be responsible for other people's lives. I had no idea at all, but I was about to learn. The tanks were almost on top of us now, and the German machine gun had shifted its fire toward them. It was time to move. Time to see if my decision would save us or kill us. Time to see what kind of man I really was. I looked at Henderson one more time, at his young face and scared eyes, and I wondered if his girlfriend in Iowa would ever know how brave he was. If any of them would know how brave these men were, these ordinary men doing impossible things in a hell that nobody back home could imagine. Then I stopped thinking and started moving, because that's all you can do. When the moment comes, you move. You do the best you can with what you have and hope it's enough, and you live with the consequences, whatever they turn out to be. I crawled to the edge of the ditch where it turned north, following the route Henderson had scouted. Behind me, 23 men moved in silence, trusting me with their lives without really knowing if that trust was deserved. The German machine gun was still firing at the tanks, long sustained bursts that echoed off the hedgerows like thunder trapped between walls. Good. As long as they were focused on the armor, they weren't focused on us. The gap Henderson had mentioned was worse than I'd expected. Not 10 feet of open ground, more like 15. And directly in the line of sight from where I estimated the machine gun nest to be. If they looked down at the wrong moment, if they swept their fire across this field instead of keeping it concentrated on the tanks, we'd be cut down like wheat. Davies crawled up beside me. Up close, I could see the gray in his stubble, the deep lines around his eyes. He'd seen this before in North Africa, in Sicily. He knew what I was thinking. We could wait, he said quietly. Let the tanks deal with the gun. I shook my head. The tanks don't know we're here. They'll bypass this position, move up the road towards St. That machine gun will still be here, cutting off our route to the crossroads. So we go for it. I looked back at the men strung out along the ditch. Some of them were so young they still had acne. Private Wilson, who'd been a clerk at his father's hardware store. Private Rodriguez, who'd told me he had a baby daughter he'd never met. Private Thompson, who'd been a school teacher, who'd quoted Shakespeare to me once while we were digging foxholes. How many of them would die in the next 10 minutes because of what I decided right now? We go, I said, but not all at once. 5 men at a time. I'll go first with the first group. If we make it across, the rest follow. If we don't, I didn't finish the sentence. Davies understood. He nodded slowly. You don't have to go first. You're in command now. That's exactly why I have to go first. Something changed in Davies' expression. A kind of recognition, maybe, or respect, or pity for a kid who was about to learn a hard lesson about leadership and luck. All right then, he said. Who do you want with you? I chose Henderson because he'd already proven he could move quietly. Martinez because he was our best shot with the Browning automatic rifle that was our squad's heaviest firepower. And 2 others, Jenkins and O'Brien, because they'd been with the unit the longest. Because they'd survived when so many others hadn't. And because maybe that meant they were lucky. I briefed them quickly. When the machine gun paused to reload, and they always had to reload eventually, we'd sprint across the gap, get into the continuation of the ditch on the far side, and cover the crossing for the next group. Simple plan. Lots of ways it could go wrong. We waited. The German gun kept firing at the tanks, which I could now hear returning fire with their main guns. Huge booming reports that made my chest shake. The armor was engaging the German position from the road, which meant they'd spotted it. That Wasquad, it would keep the enemy busy, but it also meant time was running out. Once the tanks eliminated the machine gun, they'd move on, and we'd lose our chance. The firing stopped. The sudden silence was shocking, almost painful after the continuous noise. They were reloading. This was it. Go. I hissed and launched myself out of the ditch. 15 feet had seemed like nothing when I was planning. Now it felt like a mile. The ground was churned mud and shell craters, impossible to run across without stumbling. My boots sank with each step, making sucking sounds that seemed impossibly loud. Behind me, I could hear Henderson's ragged breathing, Martinez's equipment rattling. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. The machine gun opened up again, but not at us. They hadn't seen us. They were firing at the tanks again, tracers arcing through the gray smoke that hung over everything like a shroud. 4 feet, 2 feet. I dove headfirst into the far ditch, hit hard, rolled. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I was alive. Henderson landed beside me, then Martinez, then Jenkins, and O'Brien tumbling in together in a tangle of limbs and equipment. We'd made it. All 5 avos. I allowed myself one breath of relief before crawling to the lip of the ditch and signaling Davies to send the next group. They came in waves, 5 men at a time, using the same technique. Each time, my heart hammered so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Each time, I expected to hear the machine gun shift its fire, to see men falling in that terrible, boneless way that meant they'd never get up again. But each time, they made it. Davies must have been timing it perfectly, sending each group during the brief pauses when the Germans reloaded. 21 men across 22, 23. Only Davies left now, alone in the ditch on the far side. I could see his helmet, just the top of it, barely visible above the mud. He was waiting, making sure everyone else got across before he risked it himself. That was Davies. That was the kind of man who should have been in command, not me. The machine gun fire intensified. Through the smoke, I could see the reason one of the tanks had been hit was burning. Its ammunition cooking off in a series of sharp explosions. The German gunners were pouring fire into it, making sure nobody escaped. It was our chance. Maybe the last one. I signaled Davies frantically. Come now. Come now. He saw me. I watched him gather himself, preparing to make the run. And then everything went wrong. A mortar round hit the burning tank, and the whole thing exploded in a massive fireball that sent debris flying in all directions. A piece of armor plating, maybe 3 feet across, tumbled through the air and crashed down right in the middle of the gap we'd been crossing. The impact sent mud fountaining up, and when it cleared, the gap was no longer 15 feet. The debris had created a crater that was twice as wide, and there was fire everywhere. Burning diesel spreading across the churned ground. Davies couldn't cross now. Not without running through fire, not without exposing himself for 30 seconds or more. It was suicide. I saw him realize it, saw his shoulders slump slightly. Then he looked at me across the hellscape between us, and I saw him nod. A small, deliberate gesture. He understood, we both understood, he was going to have to find another way, and I was going to have to complete the mission without him, without the one man in the unit who actually knew what he was doing. The machine gun shifted fire. They'd spotted us. Bullets kicked up mud along the edge of our ditch, and I ducked down hard, pressing myself into the cold water at the bottom. Around me, the men were doing the same. Some of them praying, some of them cursing, all of them scared. Henderson looked at me. What now? Guide question. We were cut off from Davies, pinned down by the machine gun, and somewhere ahead of us was the crossroads we were supposed to take. I pulled out Morrison's map. Someone had retrieved it from his body before we moved, and tried to make sense of the terrain. The ditch we were in ran roughly parallel to the road, which meant if we followed it north for another 100 yards or so, we should come out near the crossroads. In war, should is the word that gets you killed. But we had to move. Staying here meant dying here. The Germans knew our position now, and it was only a matter of time before they brought up mortars or adjusted their machine gun fire to sweep our ditch. We had maybe minutes before this position became a grave. We move up the ditch, I told Henderson. Fast and quiet. Passed the word. We moved in single file, crouched low, weapons at the ready. The ditch was deeper here, deeper and darker, and it smelled like death. After 20 yards, I found out why there were bodies in the water. American soldiers from some earlier engagement, floating face down in the muck. We had to push past them, trying not to think about how they died, trying not to think about joining them. Martinez was behind me, and I heard him gagging, trying not to vomit. The smell was overwhelming, a sweet-trodden stench that coated your throat and made breathing an act of will. But we kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. 50 yards up the ditch, we found something else. A German soldier, very young, maybe 17, propped against the wall of the ditch with his hands clutching his stomach. He was still alive, barely. His eyes tracked us as we approached, wide and terrified and pleading. I stopped. Behind me, the column stopped. Everyone was looking at the boy, at his gray-green uniform, at his hands trying to hold his guts inside his belly. He said something in German, weak and desperate. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. Help me, please. I don't want to die. Henderson raised his rifle. He's the enemy. He's a kid, I said. He's a German, Martinez said. He'd kill us If he could, would he? Looking at him, at his terrified eyes and his baby face, I couldn't believe he'd ever killed anyone. He looked like he should be in high school, not in a ditch in France dying slowly from a stomach wound. But Martinez was right. He was the enemy, and we couldn't help him. We barely had enough medical supplies for our own wounded. Taking time to treat him meant risking our mission, risking our lives. Leave him, Davies would have said, keep moving. But Davies wasn't here. I was, and I had to make the decision. The boy said something else in German, and this time I caught a word I recognized. Mother. Mother. He was calling for his mother. Henderson lowered his rifle. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I knelt beside the boy, took my canteen, held it to his lips. He drank greedily, and some of the terror went out of his eyes. I couldn't save him. I couldn't even make him comfortable. But I could give him water. I could stay with him for 30 seconds, so he didn't die alone in a ditch in a foreign country. I'm sorry, I said. Not sure if he understood English. I'm so sorry. He looked at me, and I saw understanding in his eyes. Not forgiveness, just understanding. He knew he was dying. He knew I couldn't help him. He knew we were enemies, and yet here I was, giving him water, staying with him in his last moments. He said something else very quietly. It might have been Danke, thank you, or it might have been nothing, just the last breath leaving his body. His eyes closed, his hands relaxed, and just like that, he was gone. I stood up, my legs shaking. The men were all watching me, and I couldn't read their expressions. Were they disgusted that I'd wasted time on an enemy soldier? Grateful that I'd shown him mercy? Confused about why it mattered? I didn't know, and I didn't have time to figure it out. Keep moving, I said, my voice rough. We moved. Another 50 yards, and the ditch started to climb, angling up toward ground level. Through the vegetation at the top, I could see the road. We were close to the crossroads now, close to our objective. But I could also hear German voices closer than before. They were here, dug in, waiting for us. I signaled the column to stop and crawled forward to the edge of the ditch where it met the road. Very carefully, I parted the grass and looked out. The crossroads was about 100 yards ahead, just like on Morris's map. But the map hadn't shown the 3 German machine gun positions covering every approach. The map hadn't shown the Dugan infantry, at least 20 men that I could see. The map hadn't shown the knocked-out American half-track still smoking or the bodies sprawled around it. Baker Company had already tried to take this position. They'd failed. And now it was our turn. I slid back down to where the men were waiting and gathered them close. We're outnumbered, I said quietly. 3 machine guns, maybe 20 riflemen, probably more we can't see. They've got the high ground and clear fields of fire. If we attack straight on, we'll get slaughtered just like Baker Company. So what do we do? Henderson asked. Fall back? I thought about Morrison lying in the mud with his hands stretched out. I thought about division, counting on us to take this crossroads. I thought about the tanks stalled behind us, waiting for this road to be cleared so they could advance. I thought about Davies, cut off on the other side of that burning gap, wondering if I was going to do my duty or cut and run. And I thought about that German boy dying in a ditch, calling for his mother. This war was bigger than all of us. Bigger than my fear, bigger than my doubt, bigger than my desire to keep these men alive. We were here for a reason, and that reason was sitting right in front of us, defended by men who would kill us if we tried to take it. But we had to try. We had to try because that's what soldiers do. That's what we'd signed up for, even if we hadn't really understood what we were signing up for until the bullets started flying. We don't attack straight on, I said. We flank them. I spread out Morrison's map and showed them what I meant. The Germans had positioned their machine guns to cover the roads, the obvious approaches, but there was another way through the hedgerows to the east. A route that was narrow and dangerous, but that might let us get close enough to use grenades. It was a long shot. It was risky, but it was better than a frontal assault. I'll take 5 men and go around to the east, I said. Martinez, Henderson, Jenkins, O'Brien, and Wilson. The rest of you stay here with Corporal Thompson. When you hear our grenades, that's when you attack from the front. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just go. The surprise is the only advantage we'll have. Thompson, the former school teacher, nodded slowly. You're splitting up the unit. I'm trying to keep us alive, I said. We could wait for reinforcements. Davies might find a way around with help. Davies is hours away at best, and we don't have hours. Look, I pointed back down the ditch, where we could see smoke rising in columns. The German artillery was starting up again, targeting the road behind us. They were trying to cut off reinforcements, trying to isolate this sector. If we didn't take the crossroads now, before they could bring up more troops, we'd never take it. Thompson saw it too. He nodded again, this time with more certainty. All right, we'll attack when we hear your grenades. Make it loud. I almost smiled. I'll do my best. We moved out, my small group of 6 crawling along the hedgerow line toward the east. The vegetation here was so thick it was like moving through a tunnel, scratching our faces, tearing our uniforms. But it provided cover, and right now, cover was worth more than comfort. We'd covered maybe 50 yards when I heard it, a mechanical clicking sound, very quiet, right in front of us. I froze. Behind me, Martinez froze. We all froze, because we knew that sound. Landmine trigger. Someone had stepped on a mine, and the pressure plate had clicked down. The moment they lifted their foot, it would explode, killing them, and probably everyone near them. It was the most terrifying sound in war. That little click that meant you had seconds to say goodbye to life. Nobody move, I whispered. Who stepped on it? Me. Henderson's voice was barely audible. It's under my right foot. I can feel it. I crawled forward carefully, so carefully, until I could see his boot. The ground around it had settled slightly, revealing the edge of a metal plate. It was a shoe mine, a German anti-personnel mine. Wooden construction so metal detectors couldn't find it. Pressure activated 4.5 pounds of TNT would blow Henderson's leg off at minimum, probably kill everyone within 10 feet. Can you disarm it? Henderson asked. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking. I don't know, I admitted. I did one training session on mine disarmament, and I'd spent most of it terrified of blowing myself up. I remembered some of it, carefully excavate around the mine, find the fuse, remove it. But that was with dummy mines in a training field in England. This was Kiao, and if I made a mistake, we all died. You have to try, Henderson said. If I take my foot off, I'm dead anyway. He was right, and we couldn't stay here forever, and we couldn't abandon him. I had to try. Everyone else, back up, I said. Get at least 20 yards away. Martinez, if this goes bad, you're in command. Complete the mission. Corporal, that's an order. They backed away reluctantly, leaving me alone with Henderson in the mine. I could see his face now, pale and sweating despite the cold. He was 19 years old. He had a girlfriend in Iowa. He'd shown me her picture. Sarah, her name was... She had a nice smile. Tell me about Sarah, I said, starting to dig around the mine with my knife. What's she like? Henderson swallowed hard. She's beautiful, blonde hair, blue eyes. She wants to be a teacher. Elementary school. She loves kids. You're going to marry her, I said, excavating carefully, removing dirt 1 grain at a time. You told me that? Yeah, as soon as I get home, I've got the ring in my pack. My grandmother's ring, diamonds. Small ones, but real. She'll love it, I said, finding the edge of the mine cave. It was wood, just like the manual said, painted dark green, about the size of a dinner plate. Do you think she'll wait? Henderson asked. If this goes wrong, do you think she'll remember me? It's not going wrong, I said, but my hands were shaking so bad I had to stop digging. I closed my eyes, took a breath, forced myself to focus. This was just another problem. Just another decision. I'd made a dozen decisions today. I could make one more. I opened my eyes and kept digging. My mom used to say that everything happens for a reason, Henderson said. He was rambling now, words spilling out. I never believed her, but maybe she was right. Maybe I'm here in this exact spot because ... I don't know. I don't know because I'm supposed to learn something, or because I'm supposed to do something important, or maybe just because the universe is random and cruel and doesn't care about any of us. The universe doesn't have to care, I said, finding the fuse assembly. We care. That's enough. The fuse was visible now. A small brass cylinder screwed into the top of the mine. I had to remove it without releasing the pressure plate under Henderson's boot, without shaking the mine, without doing any of 1,000 things that would detonate it and kill us both. I thought about my father again, about the trenches where men lived and died in mud just like this. He had never told me how he survived. He had never told me how he dealt with the fear with the constant knowledge that the next second might be your last. But he had survived. He'd come home, married my mother, had me, which meant it was possible. It meant you could go through hell and still come out the other side. I reached for the fuse. "Wait," Henderson said. "If this doesn't work, it'll work. But if it doesn't, tell Sarah I loved her. Tell her I was thinking about her at the end. Tell her. You'll tell her yourself," I said, and unscrewed the fuse. It came free with a tiny click that sounded like the end of the world. But nothing exploded. No fire. No blast. Just that little click, and then silence. I sat back hard, breathing like I'd run a mile. "Lift your foot." Henderson didn't move. "Are you sure?" "No, but we can't stay here forever." He lifted his foot, very slowly. 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. Nothing happened. He stepped away from the mine and collapsed, sitting in the mud with his head in his hands. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We both knew how close he'd just come to dying. I signaled the others to come forward, and we kept moving, but something had changed. Henderson wouldn't look at me. Every time I glanced back, he was staring at the ground, lost in his own thoughts. I'd saved his life, but maybe that wasn't a gift. Maybe now he'd spend the rest of his war wondering when his luck would run out, when the next mine would be the one I couldn't disarm. We reached the eastern edge of the crossroads without encountering more mines. From here, I could see the German positions clearly. 3 machine guns arranged in a triangle, covering all approaches. Behind them, rifle trenches. Behind those, what looked like a command post in a reinforced farmhouse. And everywhere, soldiers, not 20, more like 40. This was impossible. 6 men couldn't take this position. We'd be dead before we got close enough to throw grenades. Everything I'd learned in training, every tactical principle I'd been taught, said this was suicide. But Thompson and the others were waiting for our signal. Davies was counting on us. The whole offensive depended on securing this crossroads, and that German boy was still dying in that ditch, calling for his mother. I looked at Martinez, at Henderson, at Jenkins, and O'Brien and Wilson. 5 men who'd trusted me to get them through this day. 5 men who deserved to go home, who had people waiting for them, who had lives they hadn't lived yet. "We're going to die here, aren't we?" Wilson asked quietly. He was the youngest, just 18. His father owned a hardware store in Pennsylvania. He'd never even kissed a girl. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him it would be fine, that we'd all make it home. But I couldn't. I'd seen too much today, made too many decisions, watched too many men die. I couldn't lie to him, maybe, I said. Probably, but maybe not. Maybe we get lucky. Maybe they're not as alert as they should be. Maybe our grenades land exactly right and we take out 2 machine guns before they know what hit them. Maybe Thompson's attack from the front works perfectly and we catch them in a crossfire. Maybe. And if we don't get lucky, I looked at him, at his young face and scared eyes. Then we die doing something that matters. We die so the tanks can get through, so the offensive can continue, so other men can go home to their families. That's not nothing, Wilson. That's not nothing at all. He nodded slowly. I don't know if he believed me. I'm not sure I believed me. But it was all I had to offer. "All right," I said, pulling out my grenades. "Here's how we're going to do this." I explained the plan. Simple, brutal, probably suicidal. But it was a plan, and sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes just having a plan, even a bad one, is enough to turn fear into action. We moved into position. I could feel my heart hammering, could taste that copper taste again, could feel my hand shaking as I pulled the pin on my first grenade. This was it. This was the moment everything had been building to. The moment that would define whether I was a leader or just a kid playing soldier, whether Morrison's death meant something or nothing, whether these men's trust in me was justified or the biggest mistake they'd ever made. I looked at Henderson one last time. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Not fear, not resignation, something like determination, like he'd made peace with whatever came next. I nodded to him. He nodded back. Then I threw the grenade. It arced through the air, spinning, catching the gray light. For a moment, it seemed suspended there, frozen Ichimi, and I could see everything with perfect clarity. The German soldiers relaxed at their posts, the machine guns pointing the wrong way, the command post with its radio antenna, the whole intricate machinery of war laid out like a diagram in a training manual. Then the grenade landed, and everything became chaos. The explosion ripped through the nearest machine gun position, sending bodies and equipment flying. Before the echo faded, 5 more grenades were in the air. Martinez's, Henderson's, Jenkins's, O'Brien, Wilson's. They landed in a cluster, overlapping explosions that turned the eastern flank of the German position into a firestorm. Go! I screamed, and we were up and running, firing from the hip, sprinting across the open ground while the Germans were still reeling from the blasts. I saw a soldier stagger out of a trench, his uniform on fire. I shot him. I didn't think about it. I just pulled the trigger and kept running. Martinez was beside me, the bar thundering, cutting down anything that moved. Henderson was on my left, firing in controlled bursts like they'd taught us in training. From the front, I heard Thompson's attack begin, rifles cracking, the distinctive sound of American M1 Garand's. 8 shots, and then that metallic ping as the clip ejected. They were pushing hard, trying to overwhelm the Germans from 2 directions at once. It was working. Against all odds, it was working. We reached the first trench and jumped in. 3 German soldiers were there, stunned, bleeding from the grenade blasts. They threw up their hands, shouting, "Kamerad, Kamerad," the German word for surrender. We didn't have time to deal with prisoners. Martinez gestured with the bar toward the rear, and they ran, stumbling over each other in their haste to get away. The second machine gun opened up, traversing toward us. I could see the tracers, red lines in the smoke, searching. I threw my last grenade, not at the gun itself, but at the ammunition boxers stacked beside it. The explosion was massive, much bigger than a single grenade should have been. The machine gun disappeared in a ball of flame as its ammunition cooked off. 2 gains de, 1 to go. But the third gun had found us now, and bullets were kicking up dirt all along the trench. Wilson screamed. I spun around and saw him fall, clutching his leg. Blood. So much blood. Jenkins grabbed him, started dragging him back toward cover. "Keep moving," I shouted. "Don't stop." We pushed forward, firing, throwing grenades, moving through the German positions like a wildfire. I'd stopped thinking. I was pure instinct now. Pure reaction. See a target, shoot it. See an obstacle, overcome it. See a threat, eliminate it. This was what they'd trained us for. This mindless violence. This reduction of human beings to targets and threats and obstacles. I hated it. I hated every second of it. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I died. If I stopped, we all died. Thompson's group had reached the crossroads now, pouring fire into the German positions from the front. The third machine gun swung toward them, and I saw 3 of our men go down in the first burst. But it had turned away from us, and that was our chance. Martinez de Gaulle, he understood immediately. The bar roared, a long burst that walked across the machine gun position. I saw the gunner jerk and fall. His loader tried to take over, but Henderson's rifle cracked once, twice, and the loader went down too. The third gun was silent. For a moment, everything stopped. The Germans who were still alive were running, falling back toward the farmhouse. Our men were advancing, securing the trenches, calling for medics. The crossroads was ours. Uidi, Dani. Against impossible odds, with half-trained troops and inadequate equipment, we'd taken the objective. I stood there in the trench, my rifle still raised, trying to process what had just happened. We'd won. We were alive. Most of us anyway. Wilson was wounded, and I could see at least 3 Bodies in Thompson's group. But we'd won. Henderson appeared beside me, his face covered in soot and blood, not his own blood, I realized. Someone else's. "We did it," he said, his voice strange and distant. "Jesus Christ, we actually did it." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my eyes burning, not from smoke, from something else. Some emotion I couldn't name, some mixture of relief and horror and grief and triumph, all tangled together. Thompson climbed into the trench, moving like an old man. "Casualty report," he said. 3 dead: Rodriguez, Murphy, and Collins. Wilson's wounded, probably going to lose the leg. 6 others with minor wounds. Could have been worse. Could have been worse. That was the calculation now. Not good or bad, just worse or not as bad. 3 men were dead, men with names and families and futures, and all we could say was it could have been worse. The Germans? I asked. At least 20 dead. Maybe 10 escaped toward the farmhouse. They're still in there, but I don't think they'll cause trouble. Not unless they get reinforcements. I looked toward the farmhouse. Its windows were dark, watching. Somewhere in there, German soldiers were making their own decisions, weighing their own odds, deciding whether to fight or surrender or run. We need to secure it, I said. Make sure they can't hit the tanks when they come through. Thompson nodded. Your call. You're in command. Morsig was dead, and Davies was cut off. And somehow that meant I was in command of whatever was left of our unit. 20 men, give or take. 20 exhausted, traumatized men who just fought their way through hell and now had to do it again. Give everyone 10 minutes, I said. Water, ammunition, tend the wounded. Then we move on the farmhouse. But before anyone could move, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Tank engines. Multiple tanks. Getting closer. But from which direction, ours or theirs? I scrambled up to the edge of the trench and looked toward the road. Through the smoke and haze, I could see shapes emerging. Tanks. Big ones. And for a terrible moment, I couldn't tell if they were Shermans or Panzers. Couldn't tell if we'd just been saved or if we were about to be obliterated. Then I saw the white star on the turret, and I nearly collapsed with relief. They were ours. 3 Sherman tanks rolling up the road we'd just cleared, heading for the crossroads. The lead tank stopped, and a hatch opened. An officer climbed out, a captain, older than me by at least 10 years. He looked at the carnage around the crossroads, at our battered unit, at the burning German positions. Who's in command here? He, called Auchi. I climbed out of the trench, my legs shaking. I am, sir, corporal. I stopped, realized I needed to say my name, needed to own this. Corporal James Mitchell Baker Company. Doizini Battalion, the captain looked me up and down, taking in my age, my blood-stained uniform, the exhaustion written on my face. You took this position. Corporal? Yes, sir. Where's your commanding officer? Dead, sir. Lieutenant Morrison was killed 3 hours ago, and you decided to complete the mission anyway. It wasn't really a question, but I answered it. Yes, sir. We had orders to take the crossroads, so we took it. The captain climbed down from his tank and walked over to me. Up close, I could see he was tired too. Could see the same exhaustion and grief that I felt reflected in his eyes. This war was grinding us all down, officers and enlisted men alike. You did good work here, Corporal. Real, good work. Division's been trying to take this crossroads for 2 days. Lost a lot of men trying. We lost men too, sir. I know, but you took the objective. That means something. That means the tanks can get through, means the offensive can continue. You may have just saved a lot of lives. I wanted to feel proud. I wanted to feel like what we'd done mattered, like those 3 dead men hadn't died for nothing. But all I felt was empty, hollowed out, like something essential had been scraped away, leaving just a shell. There are German soldiers in that farmhouse, sir, I said, pointing. Maybe 10 of them. We were about to move on it when you arrived. The captain nodded. We'll handle it. You and your men have done enough for one day. There's an aid station about a mile back. Get your wounded there. Get Sami food. Get Sami rest. You've earned it. Sir, we can. That's not a request, Corporal. That's an order. You're done for today. I wanted to argue, so me part of me the part that had been making decisions all day, wanted to see this through to the end. But a larger part, the part that was just so tired, so sick of death and violence, was grateful for the order, grateful to have someone else make the decisions for a while. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The captain started to turn away, then stopped. Mitchell, I'm putting you in for a Bronze Star. What you did here today, keeping your unit together after losing your CO, taking this position against superior numbers, that's the kind of leadership this army needs. A medal? He was going to give me a medal for getting men killed. I don't want a medal, sir. I just want my men to go home. Don't we all, son? Don't we all? He walked back to his tank, and I turned to gather what was left of my unit. Thompson had already organized them, had the wounded ready to move, the dead laid out with some dignity. Henderson was sitting on the edge of a shell crater, staring at nothing. Martinez was checking his bar, methodically, like he was afraid it might stop working if he looked away. All right, I said, my voice hoarse. We're falling back to the aid station. Grab your gear. Help the wounded. Let's move out. We moved slowly, like old men, like ghosts. Behind us, the captain's tanks were moving up to the farmhouse, their machine guns chattering. I heard a few rifle shots, then silence. The farmhouse was secure. The crossroads was secure. The mission was complete. We'd won. So why did it feel like losing? The aid station was chaos. Dozens of wounded men, some screaming, some silent, all bleeding. Medics rushed from patient to patient, doing triage, deciding who could be saved and who was too far gone. We brought Wilson in first, and a doctor took one look at his leg and shook his head. We'll have to amputate. No choice. The bones shattered. The arteries severed. He'll bleed out if we don't take it. Wilson heard him. His face went white. No, please. Don't take my leg, please. But they did. They had to. And his screams followed me as I walked outside, needing air, needing space, needing something other than the smell of blood and gangrene and death. Henderson found me behind the aid station, sitting against a wall, trying to stop my hands from shaking. He sat down beside me without saying anything. For a long time we just sat there, listening to the distant sound of artillery, the rumble of trucks bringing up supplies, the occasional scream from inside. You saved my life today, Henderson finally said. With that mine? You didn't have to do that. You could have told me to step off it. Let it blow. Would have been safer for everyone else. I wasn't going to let you die if I could help it. But how many others died because we stopped? Because we took time to disarm that mine instead of pushing forward, Rodriguez. Maybe. Or Murphy. Or Collins. They died taking that crossroads. Would they still be alive if we'd moved faster? I'd been asking myself the same question. Had my decision to save Henderson cost other lives? Was that the right choice? The moral choice? Or just the easy choice? The one that let me feel like I was still human, still capable of compassion in the middle of all this killing? I don't know. I admitted. I don't know if what I did today was right or wrong. I don't know if Morrison would have made the same decisions. I don't know if Davies would have. All I know is I did what I thought was right at the time, and men died because of it, and men lived because of it. And I have to find a way to live with that. Henderson nodded slowly. Sarah wrote me a letter last week. Said she was proud of me for serving. Said I was brave, but I'm not brave. I'm terrified every second of every day. And today, standing on that mine, I wasn't thinking about duty or honor or any of that. I was just thinking about how much I didn't want to die, how much I wanted to see her again, hold her again, how much I wanted my life back. That's not cowardice, I said. That's being human. Is it? Because right now, I don't feel human. I feel like something broke inside me today. Like I left part of myself in that ditch with that German kid. The part that could feel things normally. The part that could care about things that weren't just survival. I understood what he meant. I felt it too. That sense of something essential being scraped away, leaving you raw and exposed and fundamentally changed. You couldn't go through a day like today and stay the same person. You couldn't make the decisions I'd made, see the things I'd seen, do the things I'd done, and remain unchanged. The question was what you became instead. What kind of person emerged from that crucible of violence and fear and impossible choices, and whether that person could ever find their way back to the world they'd left behind. We should check on Wilson, Henderson said after a while. Make sure he's okay. He's not okay. He's never going to be okay. He's 18 years old and he just lost his leg. I know. But we should check on him anyway. So we did. We went back inside, back into that hellscape of blood and screaming and death, because that's what soldiers do. They check on their brothers. They bear witness to suffering. They do the hard things even when they don't want to, even when it hurts, even when it breaks something inside them. Wilson was unconscious, the anesthesia taking him somewhere far away from the pain. His leg was gone below the knee, the stump wrapped in white bandages, already turning red. He looked small and young and broken. And I thought about his father's hardware store in Pennsylvania, about the life Wilson had been planning, about all the things he'd never do now because of a piece of German steel and a surgeon's saw. He'll get a Purple Heart, Marchine said, appearing beside us. Maybe he gets sent home. Might be the luckiest one of all of us. Was he? Was losing your leg at 80 lucky because it meant you got to leave the war? Or was staying whole and staying in the fight the better option? I didn't know. I was starting to realize there were a lot of things I didn't know, a lot of questions that didn't have good answers. Davies appeared in the doorway of the aid station, and my heart leaped. Hidi Meidi. Somehow, he'd found a way around that burning gap, had caught up with us. He looked even worse than the rest of us, covered in mud from head to toe, a bloody gash across his forehead, limping badly. But he was alive. "Heard you took the crossroads," he said, walking over to us. "Heard he did it with style?" "We did it," I said. "Lost 3 men doing it. Could have been 23. Could have been all of us. You made the hard calls, Mitchell. That's what command is. Making calls when there are no good options and living with the consequences. I don't feel like I made the right calls. Nobody ever does. Morrison didn't. The captain who gave Morrison his orders didn't. Eisenhower himself probably lies, awake at night wondering if he made the right call about the invasion. That's the burden of command. You don't want to get the luxury of certainty. You just get the responsibility. He was right, but that didn't make it easier. Nothing made it easier. What now?" I asked. "Do we rejoin the unit? Push forward?" Davies shook his head. "Baker Company doesn't exist anymore. What's left? 20 men out of 140. They're going to fold us into Charlie Company. Let us rest for a few days, then back into it. A few days. Then back into it. Back into the mud and the blood and the impossible decisions. Back into the machinery of war that ground men into statistics and called it victory." "I want to go home," Henderson said quietly. "I know we can't. I know we have a job to do. But God, I just want to go home." We all did. Every single one of us. We wanted to go home. Back to a world where the hardest decision was what to have for dinner. Where nobody shot at you. Where 18-year-old kids didn't lose their legs. But home was an ocean away, and between us and home were hundreds of miles of occupied France filled with men who would kill us if they could. So we'd keep going. We'd rest for a few days. We'd clean our weapons and write letters to the families of the men who died, and then we'd go back into the line. Because that's what soldiers do. Not because they're brave or noble or any of the things the posters said, but because their brothers are out there, and you don't abandon your brothers. Even when it costs you everything, even when it breaks you, even when it turns you into someone you don't recognize. That night, I tried to write a letter to Morrison's wife. Tried to explain how her husband had died, what his last moments had been like, whether he'd suffered. But the words wouldn't come. How do you tell someone their husband is dead? How do you explain that his death meant something, that it wasn't random or senseless, when you weren't sure yourself if that was true? In the end, I wrote 3 sentences. Lieutenant Morrison died leading his men with courage and honor. His last thoughts were of completing the mission. He will be deeply missed. All lies. His last thoughts were probably fear and pain and confusion. He died because a sniper got lucky, not because of any failure of courage. And would he be missed? By his wife, certainly. By his parents? But by us? By the men who'd barely known him, who'd spent 6 weeks following his orders and trying not to die. I wasn't sure, but those were the words you wrote. Those were the comfortable lies we told to make death seem meaningful, to make loss seem bearable. The truth was too ugly, too raw. The truth was that Morrison had died in the mud, calling for a medic who couldn't save him, and his death had accomplished nothing except putting me in command. And maybe that was the most senseless thing of all. I sealed the letter and gave it to Davies to send. Then I found a quiet corner, wrapped myself in a blanket, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that German boy dying in the ditch. Saw Wilson's leg coming off. Saw Rodriguez and Murphy and Collins lying dead in the trenches we'd taken. Saw Lieutenant Morrison's hand in the mud, palm up, fingers slightly curled, and I wondered if I'd ever sleep peacefully again. 3 days later, they pinned the Bronze Star in my uniform in a ceremony that lasted 5 minutes. The colonel who did it said I was a credit to the army, an example to other soldiers. A hero. Henderson and Martinez and the others stood in formation watching, and I could see in their eyes that they knew the truth. That I wasn't a hero, that I was just a kid who'd gotten lucky, who'd made guesses that happened to work out, who'd sent men to their deaths, and somehow convinced everyone it was leadership. The medal felt heavy on my chest, like it was made of all the decisions I'd made that day, all the lives I'd ended and saved and ruined. Like it was a weight I'd carry forever, a reminder that I'd become someone different in that ditch in Normandy. Someone harder. Someone capable of sending men to die. Someone who could walk past a dying enemy soldier with only a moment of compassion before moving on to the next objective. I wondered if my father had felt this way after the sum. If he'd come home changed, hollowed out, carrying weight that nobody else could see. I'd asked him once what it was like being in the war. He'd looked at me with eyes that seemed to see through me, through the walls, through time itself back to those trenches. It's like drowning, he'd said, except you don't die. You just keep drowning forever. I understood now. Standing there with the medal on my chest and the faces of dead men in my mind, I understood exactly what he'd meant. Henderson caught up with me after the ceremony. "Congratulations," he said, but there was no enthusiasm in his voice. "You earned it." Did I? Or did I just survive when others didn't? Isn't that the same thing in war? Maybe it was. Maybe in war, survival was its own kind of heroism. Not because you were braver or smarter or better, but just because you'd managed to endure one more day, make one more decision, live with one more death. Maybe that was all any of us could hope for? Sarah wrote back. Henderson said, changing the subject, she said, yes. Yes to what? To marrying me. When I get home, whenever that is. He pulled out the letter, showed me the page. Her handwriting was careful and pretty, the words simple but full of love. She said she doesn't care how long it takes. She'll wait. She says she loves me no matter what. That's good, I said. That's really good, Henderson. Is it? Because I'm not the same person she fell in love with. That guy died somewhere between Omaha Beach and that mine. This version of me, this thing I've become, I don't know if she even recognized me when I get back. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he was still himself, still the kid from Iowa with dreams and hopes and a future, but I couldn't, because I knew he was right. We'd all changed. We'd all left pieces of ourselves scattered across France, buried in the mud with the men who didn't make it. Maybe she'll love who you've become, I said. Maybe that's what love is. Not loving someone for who they were, but for who they are, even when they change. Henderson folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. I hope you're right, because I've got nothing else to hope for. That night, we moved back up to the line. Charlotte Company was pushing toward St. Lay, and they needed every man they could get. The fighting there was even worse than the hedgerows Huba in combat, house to house, room to room, the kind of fighting where you could die turning a corner, where the enemy was everywhere and nowhere, where every doorway might be your last. Davies pulled me aside before he moved out. Mitchell, you need to understand something. That decision you made at the crossroads, it was the right one. Morrison would have been proud. Would he? We lost 3 men. Wilson lost his leg. And if you'd made a different decision, we might have lost everyone. You can't command by trying to save everyone. You command by making the decisions that give your men the best chance. That's all anyone can do. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it has to be. Because if you let the weight of it crush you, if you stop making decisions because you're afraid of the consequences, then more men die. Then everything Morrison taught you, everything you learned that day, becomes meaningless. He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your gut are 2 different things. And my gut was still tied in knots, still sick with the memory of men dying because I'd told them to attack. How do you do it? I asked. How do you make peace with it? Davies was quiet for a long moment. Quenji spoke. His voice was soft, almost sad. You don't. You just learn to carry it. Like that medal on your chest. It's heavy and it never gets lighter, but you carry it anyway. Because that's what soldiers do. We moved out into the darkness. 20 men who'd survived when so many others hadn't. 20 men who'd been changed by what we'd seen, what we'd done, what we'd become. 20 men who were still trying to figure out how to be human in the middle of all this inhuman violence. I thought about Lieutenant Morrison, about that moment when he'd fallen and I'd had to make a decision. About all the decisions that had followed, cascading like dominoes, each one leading to the next. About the German boy in the ditch and Henderson on the mine and Wilson losing his leg and the 3 men who'd never go home. And I wondered if this was what the rest of my life would be like. An endless series of impossible decisions, each one with consequences I couldn't predict. Each one changing me in ways I couldn't control. If I'd spend the rest of my days looking back at that moment in the ditch, wondering if I'd made the right choice, knowing I'd never have a good answer. The truth was, I'd never know if I made the right decisions that day. I'd never know if Morrison would have done things differently. If Davies could have saved more men, if a better officer would have taken that crossroads with fewer casualties. All I knew was that I'd done my best. In the moment with incomplete information and overwhelming fear, I'd done what I thought was right. And men had lived because of it, and men had died because of it. and I'd have to find a way to live with both those truths. That was the burden Davies had talked about. Not just the responsibility of command, but the knowledge that you'd never have certainty, never have proof that you'd made the right choices. You just had to trust that in the moment, faced with impossible options, you'd chosen as well as any human being could. And then you had to find a way to keep going, to keep making decisions, keep leading, keep trying to get your men home alive. Not because you were sure you could do it, but because somebody had to, and somehow that somebody was you. Ahead of us, Saint Lay burned. Artillery fire lit the night sky, making shadows dance across the broken landscape. Somewhere in that inferno, more decisions were waiting, more impossible choices, more men who would live or die based on what I decided. I checked my rifle, settled my helmet, and kept walking, because that's all you can do. You keep walking toward the fire, even when you're terrified, even when you're not sure you can make it, even when every instinct screams at you to turn around and run the other way. You keep walking because your brothers are beside you, because the mission matters. Because giving up means all the deaths, all the sacrifices, all the impossible decisions were for nothing. And because somewhere, somehow, you still believe that what you're doing makes a difference. That taking this crossroads or that village or this city might actually help end this war, might actually bring everyone home. Even if you don't believe it completely, even if doubt gnaws at you in the quiet moments, you keep walking anyway. That's what I learned in that ditch in Normandy, watching Lieutenant Morrison fall. That's what I learned, making decisions that got men killed and men saved. That leadership isn't about being right. It's about being willing to make the call when nobody else can, to carry the weight of those decisions, to keep moving forward even when you're not sure where you're going. My father survived the Somme, came home, built a life, raised a son, which meant it was possible, meant you could go through this kind of hell and still find your way back to something like normalcy. I held on to that thought as we marched towards St. Held on to the hope that someday, when this war was over, I could find my way home, could figure out who I'd become and whether that person could exist in a world without constant violence. Henderson marched beside me, probably thinking about Sarah. Martinez was behind, checking his bar for the 1000th time. Davies was ahead, limping but steady, showing us how to carry the weight without letting it crush you. And somewhere in the darkness, in ditches and trenches and ruined towns all across France, thousands of other young men were making their own impossible decisions, carrying their own terrible weights, trying to figure out how to be human in the middle of all this inhuman destruction. We were all drowning, like my father said, drowning in violence and death and moral ambiguity. But we hadn't died yet. We were still moving, still fighting, still trying to make decisions that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe being willing to make the call, to carry the weight, to keep walking toward the fire, even when you're terrified. Maybe that's all heroism ever was. Not certainty or fearlessness or righteousness, just the willingness to try to do your best with what you have and hope it's enough. I saw my commander fall, and I had to make a decision that changed everything. Changed me. Changed the men under my command. Changed who we were and who we'd become. I still don't know if I made the right decision. I'm not sure I ever will. But I made a decision, and we survived, and tomorrow we do it all again. Because that's what soldiers do. They make impossible decisions. They carry impossible weights. They keep walking toward the fire, and they hope against all evidence and reason that somehow it will all mean something in the end.